Welcome to another round of Leader to Leader at MASSP. We are excited to have you join us today to learn a little bit more about what schools have been doing that were part of the pilot early winter, late fall, in implementing the rapid testing for athletes and what's going to be available to schools with their staff. And so we're excited to have that. If you haven't already, please do join in the chat, introduce yourself, where you're from, and maybe something you're hoping to learn today. When you're sending out the chat, please do change it to panelists and attendees. So it defaults to panelists, but if you change it to panelists and attendees when you send it out, everybody will be able to see who's in the room with us. So thank you once again for joining us today. We're super excited to do this. We are recording the webinar. So if you're looking for some things, we have a Q&A function. So if you have questions, we have a set of questions that I'll use to prompt, but if additional questions come up, feel free to add that to the Q&A, as well as if you have other ideas or things that you did that you'd like to share in the conversation, you can add that to the chat. Following this recording, usually about 24, 48 hours later, we'll send you out a follow-up email that will have a copy of the slide deck and the recording of today that you'll be able to access. So my name, for those who don't know me, is Colin Rittmaster with the Michigan Association of Secondary School Principal. With me is Steve Seward, who is helping to navigate the system for us. Super excited to have Jennifer Bustard, the principal at Mona Shores, past president of MASSP, joining us, as well as Brian Gordon, who is the athletic director at Novi High School, Nicole Carter, who is the high school principal at Novi High School, and Kevin Beasley, the principal at Clinton High School, with us today. And I'm not sure if Jeff is going to join us or not, Kevin, from who's your AD. So he may or may not be.
He was trying to get on. He can only, his camera is not working for some reason. So he's trying to get on. He said he's only on as a viewer, not a panelist or something. So we're going to try.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being with us today. As we go through here, we're going to be looking at the rapid response testing. One thing I want to clarify is that the rapid response testing is the type that's just swabbing the inside of the nose, not the entire nasal cavity. This is not the meningitis test type where you're going all the way back. And so just know that this is less, it's a little awkward, but it's not as uncomfortable, I guess, as the traditional test. So what we're going to be doing is looking at how did these schools administer the rapid response testing? Was there any types of protocols, paperwork that were required? Who were administering? Who was responsible for this? How much time did it consume? What were some of the benefits, barriers, and opportunities this presented beyond just opening up the opportunity to continue on with some of your fall seasons and competitions? Then we'll shift a little bit into what are some lessons learned? What would you continue doing? What might be some things you'd stop doing or do differently based on your experience? What adaptations might you have for this to work with your staff, given the fact that you've done it with students? Are there any pitfalls? Anything you think that we should be aware of, or as we think about administering this moving forward into the next half of the year? And ultimately, how do you think we could best utilize this around our schools to mitigate the spread of COVID-19? So that's where we're going to be going. I'll prompt. We're going to, if each of us can start, we'll start with Jennifer. We can go to Kevin. We'll go to Brian and Nicole, and we'll just kind of do a round robin as people go. But that way we're not tripping on each other. Feel free to interject as we go from there. But we're going to start out with the first question around how did you administer the rapid response testing? So just tell us a little bit about your experience with it, what you did, how you did it, what were some benefit, opportunities, and barriers. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see you.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. We have a great team here at Shores. We have an athletic trainer and a district nurse, and there are 6 of us who have all been through the training and understand it pretty well. And so we've got together and put together some protocols, and really have to give kudos to our athletic director, Todd Conrad, for wrapping his arms around all of this. And we have 54 football players and coaches and 25 cheerleaders and their coaches that we've narrowed it down now to about an hour and a half that we can get them all through. So we have 2 stations. The first.
Yeah, I had mentioned, Gary, that Matt, you had said that you kind of earmarked some lessons in that.
Not sure who signed in as me. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I thought maybe they were asking a question already.
I know who it is.
All right. So in our first station, we have our athletic trainer and our district nurse. The kids are, they come up to that table and the kit is ready. And there's paperwork that the students have to fill out with their date of birth, their personal information, and the test administrator gives them the swab. They actually are administering themselves. If they don't want to administer it themselves, the adult does it for them. They are taught how to do it. And then the nurse or the trainer actually puts the kit together, and the paperwork goes to the next station along with an administrator. That's me. I pick up the test and I carry it carefully to the next table where it's staged there for the 15 minutes. And then the students go into a waiting area until their test is complete. And one of the things that we noticed is that we really need to make sure that we keep the kids with us in case there is a issue with the testing system itself. And sometimes there's an invalid test. Maybe the control line isn't showing. So then if we need to redo the test, we can do it. So then the last station, our athletic secretary takes all this data. She enters it into the state dashboard. It's very comprehensive. There's a lot of pieces and parts to enter regarding each of the students and the coaches. So she's actually there longer than when we administer. She's got another 2 hours that she's spending putting all that data in there. So it's pretty seamless. The kids at first were pretty anxious, not sure what they were going through. And now they've done it so many times that it's just routine for them.
Thank you. So Kevin, you're at a smaller school. So Mona Shores is a larger suburban district just outside of Muskegon. And Kevin, you're on the southeast side of town or of the state, a smaller district. What was your experience?
All right, I do have my athletic director here, Jeff Wall. So I also have my maintenance supervisor in here too, because it was a team effort, as you've just heard. It takes all players to do this setup. So I'm gonna let my athletic director talk. He's taken this under reins, done a marvelous job. As you know, they've all been great. We're on our way to Ford Field, so he must have been doing his job.
Well, I can definitely attest to what Jennifer talked about in the anxiousness and the stress at the very beginning. Not knowing, we had one of our people say these things are 80% false positives, that someone threw that number out there, and that I'm obviously hoping that wasn't true because we didn't have a single positive the whole time. But it was very stressful at the very beginning. But again, like Jennifer said, once you get the process down, we were testing about 48 kids in about 30 minutes. And we had a team of about 4 or 5 people that would take the paperwork, move them to the station, administer the test, move along the line. And the longest waiting was just waiting for the results to, kind of culminate in the little card. So it was, once you got the habit of it and once the kids got the routine of it, it was very easy and a lot less stressful. And I feel really, really bad for the person that had to enter all those, Jennifer. We actually did split them into 4s, and it took a little bit less time to do that. We set our own batch of kids that we entered every time. But as far as the overall test, it's not the tickle the brain test that they do for the PCR COVID test. It's just a simple swab of the nostril and not very invasive at all, stuck into the card with the reagent. And it's like a pregnancy test. It shows up within 15 minutes, and 1 line is good, 2 lines is bad. And thankfully we didn't have any 2 lines during our process. But with organization and with people that know what they're doing as far as administering the test, we were fortunate we had our nurse and our trainer involved. You can really hammer these out quick, a lot quicker than we all thought that it could be done. So we had quite a bit of practice, but we're very thankful that we had the results we did.
Thank you. We do know around the state, I just put it in there was over 12,000 tests administered, and there was only 4 false positives in there. For students who are asymptomatic, they were 99.96 or 97. I don't know the exact number, but it was pretty high accuracy. And then it was 74.6 or 74.8% accurate for those who are asymptomatic. So some pretty good results there. In your area, so in just out in suburban Detroit area there in Southeast Michigan too, Nicole and Brian, larger suburban school with Novi. What was your experience like? How did it compare to what that Jennifer and Kevin and Jeff explained? And then what were some other things you might add to it?
Nicole, I'll take it. Pretty much the same process. What we did is we kind of we treated it as almost like a doctor office visit. We are too fortunate enough to have a full-time nurse that the district has hired, and she was she's one of our residents right here in Novi. So at any given moment, she would always be willing to come up and help us out whenever possible. We too also have an athletic trainer, Paige, did a fantastic job. So we had a couple health professionals, and ours was real simple. Again, kids are used to routine, and once the routine was established, it was a walk in the park. It is not that big of a deal. A folder was created for each of the student athletes, and then each student athlete was handed or given a number, and so their number, it's their COVID number, I guess, that we assigned to them, and everything was kept in our athletic office. Students would come in, pick up their folder. They would then fill out their form and take it to the testing area. The folder was then handed over to one of our health professionals. The test was administered, and while the test was going through its process of becoming one line or two, they would go to an area where they would social distance, and then when the test was complete, the number was called. Results was discussed with the student athlete. They would then head back to our athletic office, where Barb and Ashley were there to do the data input. And I do agree with everybody. It was very cumbersome. Often we were here for a couple hours afterwards. The testing part is not a big deal. I mean, that's pretty simple. But they've got to come up with a better way of having some autofill or something in there, so you're not having to input all the information time and time again. If there was ever to be a consideration to test our winter athletes, that would be a lot. That would be a lot, because you can't just, in this case, it was just our folks that were advancing in the state tournament. But to do everybody would be quite a challenge. There are some schools, some of the private schools are doing that. But I do also want to give kudos out to the MHSAA and members of their staff and our rep council, one of which Nicole is a member. It was absolutely mapped out for us, and getting the tests in the hands of our athletic programs. Mark Ewell and his staff were driving all around the state of Michigan, making sure. So kudos to those folks. Great stuff. But same as everybody,
So, Brian, Jennifer had mentioned they had about 90 folks that they were testing. It took about an hour and a half with one site. Kevin and them took a little less with 4 sites smaller. What kind of numbers did you have?
Yeah, we had about 45 kids. We had swimmers in our volleyball program, and then the hanger-oners, every coach in America. And then, we also tested our athletic staff here in the office on a regular basis as well, since we were going to be down there with the kids administering tests and going through that. So, somewhere about 45 people. And we were out in an hour, and data, the input, that's the challenging piece.
So essentially, by having to hand enter for each student athlete or staff member individually, and then every time you administered it, it would be a fresh start.
It's a fresh start. Yeah.
So there's no recognition like autofill or,
It would be, so, I mean, you could almost have an app. I mean, in this day and age, as someone was asking me this just the other day, what do you think about testing everybody? And I'm like, well, if you're going to test one, you test all. And you can't just test the contact sports. You have to test even the non-contact sports if we're going to commit to this. And then you can test people in the classrooms. It's endless, as you guys know. But they would have to come up with some sort of a better system for the data.
Jokingly, the only advantage to doing it the way we do it now is that I've seen kids' address and phone number so many times, I can really freak them out when I see them and say, hey, you live on Dillingham Court. Because I've entered it 100 times.
All right. So you've talked about kind of some of the time and your processes with that. Were there any benefits, barriers, new opportunities that you saw this present? Obviously, the benefit of being able to continue to play. Any other benefits, barriers, opportunities that you experienced?
I think it changed the way that our kids acted away from our building. We've said this from the get-go, where we didn't really believe that kids were contracting COVID-19 when they're on our properties. It's what's going on. It's the party buses that our families were renting and going out and having a great time, and the gatherings that they were having. It really showed that our kids can commit to each other when there's a goal, which was a state championship, carried out in front of them. So I think it cleaned up our activity away from our building. So that was a huge benefit in my eyes.
So if you weren't social distancing outside of school, this provided a leverage that I'm going to, because I may test positive otherwise.
Well, as we all know, this is a teachable moment for kids where, we've told them, we see you pulling up in cars and no one's wearing a mask, and then you get out, put your mask on, come in. Come on, folks. Let's be real here. So, we use it as an opportunity to continue to build relationships with our kids. Another commitment level where they're committing to each other, which is what educational athletics is supposed to be teaching anyhow.
Yeah, to Brian's point, the accountability, you did not want to be the one that came to school with 2 lines, because that meant we weren't going to continue to battle for each other. So I couldn't agree more that it made our kids focus and think about what am I actually doing, and I better do it right, because I'm not going to be the guy that takes down this whole thing. So that's to that point. And I would only add the peace of mind when you completed a testing day, and we actually just finished our last one for the year for football. It's like everybody can just kind of breathe, because we know that football team is good. They can huddle up without feeling like the guy across from them's got COVID-19, and it is amazing. So if it was completely possible to have tests and do it quickly, this thing really was nice.
Yeah, I would piggyback and say that, it offered reassurance to our staff. Here at our high school, we've been going face-to-face since the start of school. And so, there was some stress and anxiety on the part of staff who would be interacting with these student athletes. So for them to know that these students were being tested every 2 to 3 days offered reassurance to them as well, that we've got the safety measures and procedures and protocols in place to ensure, our students would have that awesome opportunity of make and run at the state level.
So as you think about that, I think that's where we're on the front end really anxious about false positives. On the backside, now I'm hearing it actually, the assurance that it gave actually was some comfort, some confidence that moving forward, that this is a safe place to be. So as you think about some of the lessons learned, if you could wave your magic wand thinking about student athletes or students in general and knowing what time commitments are and that type of stuff, what would you continue to do if you had either more tests or more opportunities like this? What would you stop doing? What would you do differently with students as it relates to rapid response? So earlier it was like, I wish we could do this for our winter sports. Is there, based on this experience, would you see this as something that might be viable with the student population as a whole? Would you just keep it focused on athletics? Like, as you're thinking forward, and if there were more opportunities, what would you do with it beyond staff? We'll go to staff next.
So Con, I'll start. I think your question is really one that has a lot of different layers to it. And I look at what some of the universities and colleges have done in our state, and I'll choose hope. And maybe you'll like that, Colin, because you love hope. But, I really think that they did an extraordinarily amazing job keeping their campus in person the whole time as well. But what they did is they did a lot of random a sampling of dorms based on sampling of water. And I think, how could we think of that process with the rapid testing with our own staff? Do we choose a wing in the building that we have teachers have that rapid test? Do we do it with our cohorts of students by grade level? I think there are some opportunities to do that. I would start with the adults in the building first and see what that brings us. But I do believe that that's helpful. Obviously our staff are starting to get the vaccine, and that's such an exciting thing in our community right now.
Thank you. So taking that idea, it's the testing of the water, the testing of the staff, and really trying to isolate where things are or not as a piece. The vaccine's coming. So do you see that as even, I know for some sports then in the winter, if you were able to pick maybe on a week or a day or something like that, where you could do that with other teams, would you want to continue to do that? Or would you think of it like what you're saying, Jennifer, more about building wide, and that way it's quality control for everybody?
I don't know how Jennifer and Brian feel, but I can tell you, I mean, especially being from a smaller school, if we could do this with winter sport athletes today to get winter sports off the ground, we would do it. There's no question about it. Doing a school building of 1,800 kids, I don't even really want to look at figuring out how that would work with students anyway, but at least for winter athletes, I think a schedule of, even if you were, every 3 days or every other day, however you needed to do it, I think it's definitely doable. But like Brian said, the data entry would absolutely have to be streamlined if you're doing any more than, I would imagine, 70 to 100 people. Because if you're doing more than that, the data entry component is wild. But yes, for winter athletes, total 2 thumbs up. No question about it. I'd start today.
I think the benefit from a smaller school is most of our students are the athletes, so it would probably be a 2 for us. If they're doing the athletes, it's going to do a lot of our students at the same time. So that's a bonus being at a smaller school versus one of thousands. We only have about 400 here in the high school.
I agree with everybody saying, but I think the optics of this is really, really important too. We do fight a battle that athletes get whatever they want. They are always, they're privileged, from the average student who is walking the halls and not as active in some of the co-curricular, extracurricular programs. I think if we were to do this, it would have to be all for one, everybody in, and it wouldn't be right. But unless every kid in your program, everybody in your school is playing a sport, which is pretty cool down there in Clinton. I like that. But anyhow, I think you would have to get everybody on board on that. I did talk unfortunately, I was sitting at a funeral for one of our colleagues in athletic administration, Dave Feldman from Marion. I don't know if you guys heard about Dave, but he passed away due to COVID. But I was sitting next to Steve Graff from Cranbrook, and they've been testing everybody there. And they figured they've spent somewhere between $2 and $3 million this year on testing for all those kids. And so that's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. I like to say it's taken out of the classroom, but in order for us to be in the classroom, this might be something we got to do.
Fortunately, with the newsflash that went out yesterday, if you haven't seen or not, all those ESSER dollars plus some of the surplus in the school aid and general fund budget has been reallocated to really reimburse schools for some of this, but also to be able to provide some support there too on top of where it is. And so that's at least a commitment from our governor office around that, and I think is a really helpful for us. Not necessarily specific to the rapid testing per se like that, but it could be. There's a lot of flexibility in how to use those dollars. And so knowing dollars are tight because there's other things from ventilation to barriers to PPEs and all that other stuff that are up that you got to pay for. Plus, if you're looking at space and how do we socially distance even better and all of those types of things that are going on. I think going back to what Jennifer Bustard had mentioned earlier around how do we maybe look at parts of our building or staffs or cohorts as maybe a little bit more of an economical option, and really starting with staffs, you said it was a good place to be, and bringing that back to what Jeff, you said even about the time commitment and how much just the data entry that Brian and you guys have been doing from that. So if that was a direction to go, what adaptations might you anticipate needed in order to do this with staff, and or what pushback are you hearing or expecting from staff related to this?
I would think our staff actually would be very open and receptive to this idea. Like, in, you know, full transparency, I myself have been tested now twice because I am that principal that likes to go to everything. And so in order for me to go to the volleyball game, I did, you know, get tested, you know, a couple times that week leading up. I also think it's important for us to model the behaviors we want to see out of our students as well, right? So if the principal can do it, then I can do it. But I mean, our staff have been asking ever since they, you know, Brian put out a tweet over winter break about the student athletes being tested. I get asked 5 to 10 times a day, like, is there any way that we can have access to those tests ourselves? And so I think it'd be much more manageable to, you know, administer 150 tests for staff versus 2,000. Well, actually, we only have about 1,000 students that are face-to-face and 1,000 students that are virtual, but I think it would be manageable. It's just a matter of, do we have the resources? And then in terms of time, I think we would have to create a very concrete, maybe use a sign-up genius to hold us accountable to actually having appointments similar to what our health division has done for those of us who have been able to sign up and get the vaccine. And I think on the front end, if there's a way that we can have them type in the information rather than having 2 staff or 3 staff personnel doing all that data input, I would say that would be my biggest recommendation to the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, based on the feedback that we have been, you know, kind of gathering even in this space. If there is a way that they can do some of that preemptive work on their end, I think it would be a tremendous benefit for all stakeholders involved.
Yeah. Another concern, Colin, that popped up that we weren't expecting is we had, when we made the announcement, we were be rapid testing our football and cheer team. We had a couple parents who were concerned about their rights and privacy, and they did not want their student athlete tested. And so after some conversations, we were able to convince all but one, and one opted out and doesn't get to go to Ford Field on Friday. And that's sad because of their beliefs. And you have to meet them where they're at. You understand that. But the word constitutional rights was brought up a couple times.
Yeah, and the politics play out in different regions differently, with one there and it could be 100 in someplace else, right? With local politics and how that goes. And I think that's a important piece of, as building leaders in the middle of all this. You know, you have the students and who want to, you got parents of this, you got all this stuff, and each and every day you're fighting for children and championing their causes. And in the end, you're fighting both sides in that, but it's for the common good. And so we do thank you for that as you go. Are there some pitfalls? So like the privacy or constitutional rights type of pitfalls that you think that we could anticipate, or we need to be aware of for schools who haven't done it yet? So the rights and constitutional privacy is one area. Is there any other pitfalls that you maybe stepped into or just about to, and then in the moment you made an adaptation that maybe others who haven't done it yet could benefit from?
And I think, like instances in this, it's important that you effectively communicate. The more proactive you can be and the more transparent that you can be in regards to the processes and protocols that you have in place, you know, keeping in mind, you know, safety, security, confidentiality, all those different things. I think that's critical, that effective communication piece, to dispel some of the myths that, you know, the rumors that get created, et cetera. The more transparent that we can be, the better.
Jeff, you had mentioned even earlier around, like, you didn't want to be the student with the double line. What thoughts did you, so if you didn't have any positive tests, what were your plans, or thoughts on how you were going to approach it if you did get a test.
Yeah, so obviously we did exactly what everybody else was talking about, how every student got a number, and then, you know, their tests were assigned by number for all the HIPAA reasons and whatnot. So everybody went into a private area and whatnot. So if we had gotten a positive, we would have followed the protocol. That person would have been sent home immediately. You know, only the fact that we're only testing 40, 45 people, you would have known if someone was there and then wasn't. But, you know, it's not like that's an advertised thing, but we would have sent them home. And then at that point, the protocol was that they would have gotten a PCR test and hopefully that would have come back negative. But, you know, it's definitely a concern as far as the privacy goes. It's, you know, everyone does get a number, but then again, everyone knows if you were positive, it's going to be fairly obvious that you're now not coming to practice. So could be a stigma there. I can see that.
Were there other ways that either at Mona Shores or at Novi you thought about mitigating for that or not? For example, Brian, you had talked about kids were waiting. Is there a way where kids are waiting and they go off their own and then find out the results, and so that they're not still in the together, or is it?
Well, yeah, you could probably, you know, do it via text message. We use Final Forms, and so which is a great tool for our managing our data. And so what we can do, we could send something out through Final Forms. We could almost send them home, and they would get it. They would look for an email from Final Forms that would tell them if they were positive or negative. And then if they were positive, it would come with some instructions. You know, that's just off the top of my head, but certainly that's why we have that Final Form system. We could utilize it that way.
Would the rest of the team have come back together anyways in practice without that other individual, or would you have had to shut down your team based on?
Well, much of that, and I know football can probably speak to this a little bit more because I'm sure they did some positional practicing, you know, where they didn't have everybody together all the time. We're fortunate, again, where we have a school nurse who, since Oakland County Health Department was so far behind when it came to contact tracing, that responsibility was given to Kathy Ferris. And so Kathy and I have, oh gosh, I probably talked to Kathy the last couple months more than I talked to my wife. So which probably could be a good thing. No, don't tell Jill I said that. But just keeping that open communication between yourself and the health professional, we would have, we have protocols in place and how we might have addressed it. Much would have depended on the sport and the nature of practice. As some of us experienced earlier in the fall when some of our teams were getting quarantined and others were not being quarantined, we couldn't figure out why they weren't being quarantined. And, you know, but again, Kathy and I would have worked our way through that.
So Colin, we actually, on the second day of our testing, we had a test show up with a little bit of a blur on the bottom. It wasn't a solid line, and our team all looked at it and agreed that we were going to be using an abundance of caution. And so we went through the protocols as if it were positive, and we simply identified all of his close contacts right away. And we sent his family a call, and we had him go do the PCR test that evening. And all of those kids were quarantined until those results came back. And positively enough, they were negative. And so we were very pleased, but we were able to jump at it really quickly. So I'm not quite sure that there's any way around the confidentiality piece, because the kids, number one, they're going to Snapchat each other. Did you hear? Oh boy, this is going on. So I think as much as we can to respect, and we're told so many times to be confidential, I don't think that's a reasonable request. The kids are emailing their teachers, oh, by the way, I'm close contact, I'm quarantined. It's more of an accepted reality that we're all living right now. But I think when we first started the school year, it was very scary for people and a lot of anxiousness. Now it's kind of the way we operate now.
I do think it has to do with the culture of your school too, and how we take care of people and value people and the human side of it.
Oh, absolutely.
And whether you are positive, you test positive or negative, you're still a sailor, or, each of our school. And I think that's so important as building leaders. How do we create the culture that is about people first and about caring for them? And that's something that I know in each of your schools you've done. And I do think, as you mentioned, that from the beginning where it was a little more taboo and you might be shunned or shamed for coming up positive, it really has become more that, it's just something that's spreading with the numbers that have been there. And I think, though, as Brian mentioned, though, that using this as an opportunity to leverage accountability personally for yourself and for the collective good in school and outside of school, whether it's socially or around your own house, even that way. And I think those are some of the positives that can come from this. As you noted, it does take time. And the testing time isn't the big deal. It's the reporting time. So what I'm hearing loud and clear, like flashing lights, is we need the state to be able to somehow automate these a little bit more for directory type information, so that really it's just a matter of inputting the results for that day from a reporting piece. And if that's something, as we work with staff, if that's something where they can log into their account and fill it out the first time, is almost like you would an application or anytime you set up an account. And then from there, you could add the results. So those would be things that are positive. Beyond that, then being conscious that there's already politics around privilege. So whether it's around your band program or your athletic program or your choir program or first robotics or whatever. So in picking groups, if that was a way to go, you need to be aware of what message that sends to other students. And so working with staff may be the first way of doing that until you can ramp up, if even ever, to a larger group. And how do you segment it? So it's not about one having a greater privilege or opportunity than the other. But it's interesting how time has changed, where it used to be from that privacy and I don't even want this, to now can I too, and the security and comfort it brings to just knowing. I think sometimes the greatest fear is the unknown. And as Nicole, you talked about, just the comfort of knowing you got it or you don't, but then I can do something about it, not wondering if this cold, this sore throat is COVID or not, and what are the ramifications. In closing up, I'm not seeing any other additional questions or comments in the chat or that. If you could walk away with any words of wisdom to those who are on today or to your colleagues around the state, what would you share with them as it relates not only to rapid testing, but in general, just around COVID, student activities and school? So if we can start maybe with Jen, and we'll just kind of go around the horn.
I think first and foremost, so proud of all of our colleagues around the state that have worked so hard to navigate safety, and each community has a little bit of a different value and things that they think is important. I think at the end of the day, if we can continue to have that mindset to offer as many things as we can for our students safely, and keep communicating how important it is to work together with those safety protocols and continue to have that message, but to just keep finding ways to offer things to kids safely, especially in person. They need it and they need us and we need them. And better days lie ahead, team, that's for sure.
Thank you, Jennifer. Kevin, Jeff?
That's kind of where I was going to head to it, is that, we need them in here as much as possible. I mean, we've been in and out, face to face, then we get sent remote, we're in and then we get close contacted out. So again, whatever we can do to facilitate the kids being safely together, I'm all for it. And then the team effort that, that my athletic director and maintenance and everybody, the nurses, everybody that we have here put together. I don't want to speak for him, but it's making a big impact on our little community and of course the kids, which is what we're in business for.
Yeah, I would say if the testing ever became a thing for the general student body or winter athletes, whoever, my message would simply be is that it will seem daunting at first, but once you get the system rolling, just like anything, you'll get the hang of it and you'll get it easily after that, and it'll just go quick. And faith over fear. You just got to do it.
Just like wearing these masks. Took us a while to get used to them.
Brian, and then we'll go to Nicole.
we just had a meeting with a bunch of administrators today, and I think, COVID has done some interesting things to us. But one thing that it has done is that it's really, it's brought us together as educators. We've never leaned on each other more than what we've been doing now, just like what we're doing right now. Taking ideas from others, listening to what others are doing, sharing our ideas. Our league, the KLAA, it's an amazing league. And we've got some amazing leaders who have all supported each other, and not just in our jobs, but even personally too. Us being able to provide an opportunity for kids here in Novi to be face-to-face, and then what the MHSAA has done to offer that opportunity for kids to compete, and then to finally finish these fall tournaments is just simply amazing. It is truly, you hear about how it takes a village to raise a kid. Talk about the size of our village, folks. It's been unbelievable. So God bless all of you, and everything that you guys have been able to do in your communities. We're fortunate where we got an amazing principal, Nicole Carter, who supports us in every way. So I'm not just saying that because she's on this call, but it's true. So best of luck all the rest of the way, everyone.
Yeah, I would just say that, I'm incredibly proud of all of our staff, teachers, counselors, social workers, coaches, our students and families and in the entire community in terms of what we've been able to do as a result of COVID. I would say it's really important for us not to rest on our laurels, keeping in mind that COVID numbers are going down. I would want to encourage anyone who takes a peek at this presentation just to remind them that in order for us to stay in, we can't let up, which means you need to wash your hands, you need to wear your mask, you need to socially distance yourselves, and we just need to honor the protocols and safety measures that we have in place to ensure that we are able to come into school each and every day, providing remarkable learning opportunities for our students, and then hopefully extracurricularly all those fantastic programs that provide that connection. With us being a large high school, I feel like the greatest connection that they can have in making a large high school small is sports, is the fine arts, is performing arts, all those phenomenal things. And so I would be remiss not to remind us of the importance of maintaining those safety protocols moving forward.
Testing, vaccines are just two parts of the solution. It can all start with wearing a mask, washing our hands, staying our distance, all of those things that when we look at the curve in Michigan and what they thought was going to happen over the holiday break, we crushed the anticipated numbers. Crushed it, because people did stay home. They did socially distance. They did wear their masks. And so the expected rise in Michigan is way below anything else in the nation. And I think it's because people like you have been leading the effort and sharing those ideas there. So thank you very much for taking time to be with us today. Thank you for being the learners, but also the contributors. Too often in a consumer society, we become critics. We can critique everybody's displays, their services, their products, and everything else. But it takes producers to actually create opportunities. And you have been producing throughout the year for your kids, for your community, by being able to engage in this process. You provided us some roadmaps and ideas of what we can do locally to do this. So thank you for your willingness to give up time to join with us today and share your stories and experiences, but also thank you more importantly for what you do each and every day for the children of your community and the staff that you serve. So have a great afternoon, and we will push this out in the next 24 to 48 hours.